The teeth and gums are currently sharing the same shader as the skin, so I just needed to revise the gloss factor of them by painting the gloss mask in full white. So I will just enter edit mode and open the UV image editor and fill their UV space in white and save the picture. That should be it to shade them. For the eyes though, I decided to start with a very new shader, an empty one. So you can see in the node editor, I've just the eye color that is loaded and also the veins and the transparency mask into different image texture. As for the skin, I will be using a shader, subsurface scattering shader. I will plug in my color and set the scale to a very low value like 0.05. Then I will add a color ramp so that I can change the color of my base color map to something really reddish that will go into the radius of the subsurface scattering node. I will then use the eyes mask, which is our transparency mask, to mix my subsurface scattering node with a transparent shader using a mix shader node. I figured that the back of the eyes was painted in black, so it got transparent, so I got back onto my mask texture, got into painting mode and just fill it in white so that the back of the eyes will not share the transparent shader. I will now use our vein mask that we have painted to mix my base color with a dark reddish color. So I will add a color mix shader, plug it just after our base color, set a dark red color, very saturated, and use the mask as the factor so that I should see some veins appearing on the side. So I might be using a color ramp then just to add a little bit of contrast and to have control on this transition. I can then add the vector bump node and plug the original veins mask, the one that is not too contrasted, into it, set the strength to 0.2. And then I will add, as usual, a glossy shader to check if it's reacting correctly, and then we will work on the glossiness of our eye. You may have noticed that I've added an add shader, and this is because for the eye I won't be mixing the glossy BSDF with the previous shader, but I will add it on top of it. And to control the adding factor, because there is no factor on the add shader, I will be using a mix shader with an empty slot in between. So I will add a new mix shader and plug the glossy BSDF into the second slot. Then I will plug the output of this mix shader into the add shader. So as the glossy is set on the second slot, the value that is close to 1 will mean more glossiness. And the fact that is added on the previous shader is that means that I will always have some nice highlights, even if it's not physically accurate. For a nice shader, from what I have experienced, it looks always better this way. And as we are previously mixing our glossy BSDF with no shader, as we have a mix shader with an empty slot, that means that we can control its factor. So for more precision, I will now set with my layer weights and Fresnel effect an input group mix value, and I will set the mixing values that will be inputted in this mix shader, so that I have a real control upon my glossy shader before it's added to our wall shader. So values of 0.15 and 0.08 seems to be good in the end. But a little problem I have is that when I'm looking at the eyes from the side, the cornea looks totally transparent and there is no distortion. So we will need to add a little of refraction into our shaders. So I will add a shader, refraction shader. I will move it and mix it before the add shader for the time being. So I can move this out, duplicate the mix shader, and I will then mix it using the eye mask so that it's affecting only the cornea, and you can see that it turns really dark. And this is because the refraction shader will also refract shadows, and we don't want that. So I've duplicated the transparent BSDF, and I will use an input light path. I will plug the transparent BSDF in the second slot, and then use is shadow ray to be plugged into the factor. It means that whenever a shadow ray will be cast through our shader here, it will disappear because it will hit our transparent BSDF instead of being affected by the reflection BSDF. So that's a great way to get the distortion without any darkening. Now I just need to get rid of the very first mix shader because I'm mixing transparency then re-adding transparency, while here we have created this transparent but refractive shader, and I just need to invert those both input in the mix shader here, and let's check how it looks through the add shader then, and that should look fine. So don't worry if the iris here looks very reflective, it's because it's sharing the same material. We will give it its own material to avoid this kind of effect. But here when I'm looking on the side, I can still see the iris because it's refracted onto the cornea. So I get a very nice effect. So I will just be playing with the index of refraction and set it to 1.1 to have a little less distortion, something really subtle but efficient in any way. I will then make some cleanup, frame stuff and give them a name so that it's easy for me to identify them, and once I'm done I will add another material slot to our eye and duplicate this eyes shader and apply it to the iris and make a copy of it so that we can modify it without destroying what we have done for the sclera and cornea. When working on the iris now, I will be using the color map as a bump map too, so I will plug in the color map into the bump node. And then I will get rid of all the useless nodes that we have, the transparency and stuff like this. I will just keep the reflection, but I don't want it to be added this time. I just want it to be mixed with the subsurface scattering node. So I'm just reconnecting here the color into the RGB curve. And then I will connect my glossy shader with a roughness of 0.2 into the mix shader. And I will keep the mixing value we have set before because I believe it looks pretty nice. I will then go rapidly into edit mode because I've spotted this odd reflection here, and I believe this is a problem on the model, probably supporting edge loops that are too close one to the other, so I will just smooth this rapidly. Once I finished correcting this odd edge, I will just display my character and give it a new shape key with the eyes opened so that I can check if the eyes match his face, and I will also slightly move them and reset their position.